why is it that so many powerful political families send their kids off to boarding school? And I don't know, as a clinical psychologist, how much research or how much of that have you looked at with the link to boarding school teaches independence, toughens them up a little bit, the whole opportunity to have your kids have a little bit more challenging times for them to go through? What are your thoughts on boarding school?
Well, I don't think that there's any evidence that, there's not a lot of evidence that school quality per se is a determining factor in the outcome of educational processes. That actually seems to be a situation. I mean, there are exceptions, and I'm certainly not trying to say that every school is equal, but a tremendous amount of what determines whether or not a child is successful at school is their intelligence. I mean, you people all went to high school, to junior high school. I mean, you know that in a group of 30 kids, there's some kids that are so bright that they figure everything out in the first 15 seconds, and there are other kids who just can't get it no matter how hard they try. And that's one of the really catastrophic and built-in inequalities in the world. Generally in boarding schools, because wealth and intelligence tend to be correlated, which is also something you'd expect, right? You'd expect more intelligent people to be able to make more money, or you'd certainly at least expect less intelligent people to be able to make less money. The schools generally produce good outcomes, but it's not obvious that it's because of the schools. And this is true at higher levels of education too, to a degree that people don't really realize. So for example, at a university like Harvard, any of the Ivy Leagues, it's very, very difficult to get in, right? So there's far more applicants than there are positions, and they use the SAT as one of the entry criteria. So you have to have a very high SAT score, and then generally you have to be good at least one or two other things to be considered. And a very large percentage, for example, of Harvard undergraduates, and there's only about 4,000 of them, so it's a rather small school, were valedictorians of their class. And they have very high SAT scores, and the SAT is a proxy for IQ. The people who administer the SAT don't like to admit that, but there's absolutely no doubt that it's the case, because any set of questions that assess general knowledge and problem-solving ability you can derive an IQ score from. And so part of the advantage of hiring an Ivy League graduate isn't the fact that they went to a high-quality school, it's the fact that it was impossible to get in. And so the screening has been done for the employer by the admissions process at the school. And the same thing is true of business schools, and the people who run business schools know that, is that the primary value that they offer, and again, this is not the case with every business school, is the fact that if you hire an MBA from their program, and it's a very selective program, then you have a very high probability of hiring someone who's intrinsically intelligent and conscientious. And that's a great predictor, those are great predictors of long-term success. So, and what would you expect in a society that's essentially meritocratic? It's pretty straightforward to think this through. Not only should people who are faster and smarter be more productive, especially if they're hardworking, but that's really what you'd want, isn't it? I mean, how the hell do you want to set up your society? You want to set up your society so that incompetent people who do nothing succeed? That first of all, that can't happen. So, you know, and I should say that I'm very aware of the unfairness of a meritocratic society, of its intrinsic unfairness. So let me give you an example. I had someone write me the other day. He had listened to some of my lectures on IQ, and he sent me his IQ scores. And he was in the 5th percentile, which basically meant that 95% of the people around him were faster cognitively than he was. And you know, the letter it wasn't very grammatically correct, and it wasn't very well written, although it was very sad. And he said that he had a very difficult time finding a job and keeping one, that he was constantly frustrated and unnerved. And that's a terrible thing, you know, because it's not as if it's his fault. A lot of what constitutes your innate cognitive ability or your cognitive ability is something that's really granted to you by fortune and fate. And I mean, you can make someone stupider, but it's very difficult to make someone smarter, although hard work definitely is a plus. People stack up at the bottom, and it's not easy to figure out how to deal with that, but because you need the people who are leading the cognitive revolutions to develop entrepreneurial enterprises and to run things properly and to invent the new things that we all use, and hopefully to raise the living standards of society in general.